Hello and welcome, dear students. Today we are going to discuss the topic watershed management. Every natural water body such as river, lake, stream, pond and estuary is associated with a watershed. A watershed refers to the land area from which water drains into a particular water body. Rainfall or melting snow flows over the land surface, moving downhill through this area. During this movement, water carries soil particles, nutrients and other materials, which are eventually delivered into the river, lake or stream. A watershed is a natural area of land with clear physical boundaries, such as hills and valleys, from which rainwater flows towards a common outlet called the pour point, usually into a stream or river. When rain falls in a watershed, some water flows over the land surface into streams, while some seeps into the soil and moves on underground. A part of the water evaporates is used by plants and people, or is stored in the soil and groundwater. Watersheds are not static. Their conditions change over time. They may become wet during periods of heavy rainfall and dry during low rainfall seasons. The amount and quality of water flowing through a watershed can vary from season to season, year to year, and even during a single storm. These changes are closely linked to the hydrologic cycle operating within the watershed. Watershed management planning is a systematic process that produces a practical framework or strategy for conserving and improving water quality and related natural resources within a watershed. Since watersheds often extend across administrative or political boundaries, effective planning requires the involvement and cooperation of all local authorities, and there are different approaches to watershed management. Now let us discuss them. Across the world, watershed management strategies are continuously being refined to deal with watersheds that face multiple and interconnected challenges. Modern approaches focus on long-term sustainability and coordinated use of natural resources rather than isolated interventions. The integrated approach emphasizes the combined management of essential natural resources such as land, water and vegetation, supported by appropriate technology within a natural drainage system. The objective is to ensure sustainable resource development and can adequately meet the growing needs of the population. Achieving this approach requires activities such as conserving land and water resources, improving groundwater recharge, adopting improved crop varieties, and encouraging higher cropping intensity. The integration of these components ensure balanced resource use and long-term environmental stability. Now let us discuss conglomerate or participatory approach. The conglomerate approach focuses on collective decision making and stakeholder participation. It brings together government agencies, local communities, policy makers and supporting organizations that possesses the expertise and authority to manage natural resource effectively. In this approach, non-governmental organizations, local governing bodies, municipalities and private institutions play a crucial role in strengthening collaboration between the public and watershed management programs. For successful implementation, continuous guidance and timely technical support must be provided to farmers, local residents and decision makers to ensure informed participation and effective resource management. Now let us discuss integrated water resource management. Integrated water resource management is an approach that encourages the joint planning and management of water, land and related natural resources. Its main aim is to improve economic and social benefits in a fair way, while at the same time protecting ecosystems so that they remain healthy and sustainable in the long term. IWRM moves away from the old method of managing water through separate and uncoordinated sectors. Such fragmented approach often resulted in inefficient services and overuse of resources. Instead, IWRM treats water as part of the natural environment as well as a resource that has social and economic value for people. A key area behind IWRM is that different uses of limited water resources are closely linked. For instance, excessive water use of irrigation or polluted runoff from agriculture can reduce the availability of clean water for drinking and industry. Similarly, untreated wastewater from towns and factories can contaminate rivers and damage natural ecosystems. When water is kept flowing in rivers to protect fish and ecosystems, less water may be available for farming. These examples show that uncontrolled and isolated use of scarce water resources leads to waste and long-term problems, making irrigated and balanced management essential. These examples show that uncontrolled and isolated use of scarce water resources leads to waste and long-term problems, making integrated and balanced management essential. Effective management of natural resources requires an integrated approach so that the livelihoods of local communities can be protected and improved. For this purpose, a suitable planning unit is needed, where important resources such as land, water and vegetation can be managed together in a coordinated way. Administrative or political boundaries are often not useful for this task because problems like pollution, soil erosion and water flow do not stop at district or state boundaries. Using a natural unit for planning also helps in dealing with conflicts between people living upstream and downstream, as resources like water are shared naturally rather than divided by political lines. Among natural units, watersheds are the most appropriate for planning and management. Soil resources can be managed using soil types or land units, and vegetation can be planned based on forest types. Grasslands or similar categories. Water, however, is best managed at the watershed level because a watershed is defined by natural drainage patterns. Within a watershed, the movement of rainwater from where it falls to where it leaves the area can be clearly understood, along with the resource of sediment and pollution entering streams. Since soil and vegetation can also be effectively managed within watershed boundaries, the watershed becomes the most practical and logical unit for integrated natural resource management. However, the watersheds should not be too large so that they also function as manageable social and economic units for local communities. Watershed management has huge importance. Let us elaborate this. Watershed management is important because all activities taking place within a watershed influence its water and natural resources. Actions such as farming, construction, urban development, gardening, use of septic systems, water withdrawal, and even vehicle maintenance can affect water quality and the overall health of the watershed. Managing a watershed helps us identify these activities and suggest better way to reduce their negative effects. Rainwater runoff and melting snow often carry pollutants from land surfaces into rivers, lakes, and streams. Watershed management helps control this pollution by identifying its source, understanding how contaminants move through the watershed, and recommending measures to prevent or reduce pollution before it reaches water bodies. Another key reason for watershed management is that it brings together all stakeholders living and working within the watershed. Since everyone depends on the same water and land resources, cooperation among communities, institutions, and users is essential. This shared approach makes it easier to plan actions, set priorities, and use limited resources more effectively. Watersheds usually extend across several administrative or political areas, so activities in upstream regions can strongly affect downstream areas. Pollution or poor land use practices. Upstream can reduce the effectiveness of conservation efforts downstream. Therefore, planning and managing resources at the level of the entire watershed with active participation from all local authorities and communities is necessary to protect and sustain watershed resources. There are some key issues in watershed management. In the past and even today, water resources have mostly been managed through separate sector-based approaches. This has resulted in poor coordination and fragmented decision making. Water management is often controlled by centralized top-down institutions whose effectiveness and credibility are increasingly questioned. Weak governance systems have intensified competition over limited water resources. Integrated water resource management offers a better alternative by promoting coordination between sectors, encouraging cooperation, increasing transparency, and involving stakeholders in a local and cost-effective water management. While many countries recognize that meeting basic human water needs should be the top priority, a large portion of the global population still lacks access to safe drinking water and proper sanitation. These shortages mostly affect poor communities in developing countries. Providing adequate water supply and sanitation in both urban and rural areas remain a major challenge for these regions. Achieving global targets such as reducing by half the number of people without access to water and sanitation requires major changes in investment priorities. Countries that adopt integrated water management approaches are better placed to meet these goals. Now let us discuss securing water for food production. In coming 25 years, the world will need to produce enough food for an additional 2 to 3 billion people. Water availability is becoming a major limiting factor for food production, and in many cases it is an important as or even more critical than the availability of land. At present, agriculture, especially irrigated farming, use the largest share of fresh water, accounting for over 70% of total water withdrawals and more than 90% of consumptive water use. Integrated water resource management provides a way to address these challenges by improving water use efficiency, encouraging conservation, managing demand more fairly among users, and promoting the reuse and recycling of wastewater to reduce pressure on freshwater sources. Protecting essential ecosystems, natural ecosystems play a crucial role in maintaining the water cycle. Land ecosystems in upper parts of river basins help rainfall soak into the ground, recharge groundwater, and regulate river flows. Aquatic ecosystems also provide many benefits such as timber, fuel wood, medicinal plants, and habitats for wildlife and fish breeding. These ecosystems depend on good water quality, natural flow patterns, seasonal changes, and stable groundwater levels. Poor water quality and unplanned development threaten their survival. Therefore, land and water management decisions must consider ecosystem needs and reduce negative impacts wherever possible. IWRM supports the protection of minimum amount of water, often called an environmental reserve, which is necessary to sustain ecosystems that are vital for human well-being and development. Gender inequality in water management institutions are largely dominated by men, and women's participation remains limited, even though it is slowly increasing. This imbalance matters because water-related decisions affect men and women differently. Women are mainly responsible for household water use, sanitation, food preparation, and family health, making them key stakeholders in water management at the domestic level. Despite this, decisions about water supply systems, sanitation technologies, water point locations, and maintenance arrangements are usually taken by men. In some cases, well-intentioned projects fail because women's view are ignored, such as when sanitation facilities are introduced without considering the extra burden of water collection placed on women. A core principle of IWRM is inclusive decision making, ensuring that all water users, women and men, rich and poor, have a voice in choices that directly affect their daily lives. What is the history of watershed development program in India? India has a long tradition of watershed development rooted in community-based practices. Historically, local communities managed water resources by collecting and conserving rainwater and regulating surface runoff. Traditional systems such as storage tanks, ponds, and small underground reservoirs were widely used for rainwater harvesting and proved to be effective in sustaining water availability. Recognizing their value, the Government of India began integrated these indigenous practices into formal watershed programs, particularly through micro watershed planning initiatives introduced from the late 1980s onwards. Nearly 60% of India's cultivated land, covering about 142 million hectares, depending mainly on rainfall. These rain-fed areas generally show low agricultural productivity, limited income and employment opportunities, and a high level of poverty. Much of this land is fragile and marginal in nature. Rainfall in such regions is uncertain and unevenly distributed, which often causes water stress during critical crop growth stages and makes farming highly risky before and after harvest. Recognizing these challenges, the Government of India began supporting watershed development programs in the early 1970s. Over time, several initiatives were introduced in drought-affected and water-scarce regions, including the Drought-Prone Area Program Desert Development Program, River Valley Projects, National Watershed Development Project for rain-fed areas, and the Integrated Watershed Development Program during the 1980s and earlier periods. Watershed programs mainly focus on structural measures such as soil conservation works and rainwater harvesting. However, many of these measures like contour bounds and pits were not sustained by farmers and were often removed from fields. This experience showed that a rigid top-down approach was not effective and that both individual and community level involvement was necessary for long-term success. As a result, from the mid-1980s and early 1990s, greater emphasis was placed on integrated watershed development. With active community participation, the focus shifted towards improving agricultural productivity and livelihoods along with conserving soil and water resources. In 1994, the Government of India formed a committee under the chairmanship of Professor C.H. Hanumantha Rao to review existing watershed strategies. The committee highlighted the need to move away from bureaucratic planning and strongly recommended involving local communities in decision making. Based on these recommendations, new guidelines were introduced in 1995. Stressing collective action and people participation through community organizations, non-governmental organizations and Panchayati Raj institutions. These guidelines were further revised in 2001 under the Haryali framework to simplify producers, strengthen the role of local institutions and enhance community empowerment. Additional guidelines followed in 2003. Later, the Niranchal community in 2005 reviewed watershed programs across the country and recommended shifting the focus from purely engineering-based activities to broader livelihood concerns. The main goals of watershed management programs in India include conserving and improving natural resources such as land, water, vegetation, livestock and human skills in an integrated and sustainable manner, creating large-scale employment opportunities and reducing inequalities between irrigated and rain-fed regions while contributing to poverty reduction. Ensuring safe drinking water, proper sanitation and good hygiene for all people is the central aim of Sustainable Development Goal 6. The goal also focuses on ending open defecation, improving water quality, using water more effectively and managing freshwater resources in a sustainable manner. Over time, human societies have increasingly interfered with the natural water cycles by constructing dams, canals and other large engineering structures to control rivers and streams. While these efforts initially helped increase water availability, especially during the early and mid-20th century, they did not offer long-lasting solutions. Gradually, it becomes clear that water-related problems cannot be solved only through short-term supply expansion. Instead, a long-term and sustainable approach is needed, one that changes how humans interact with and value water resources. Since independence in 1947, India has placed strong emphasis on improving access to water and sanitation. Greater progress was observed after the 1960s, particularly in providing clean drinking water, sanitation facilities and hygiene awarenesses. Despite these efforts, India's progress towards SDG 6 remains moderate, with the country achieving around 56.6% of the target. According to Sustainable Development Report 2025, India improved its global standing ranking 99 in the global SDGs index, but with shortcomings in water and sanitation management being a major reason. Giving it close link to public health and economic development, achieving SDG 6 remains a critical priority for the country. India faces multiple obstacles in meeting SDG 6 targets, which require joint efforts from government institutions, local communities, civil society, and the private sector. Sustainable water management, improved infrastructure, public awareness, and sufficient funding are essential to overcome these challenges. One of the most serious issues is water scarcity, particularly in dry and semi-arid regions. Uneven availability of water, excessive extraction of groundwater, poor infrastructure, and inefficient management practices have worsened the situation. Another major concern is inadequate sanitation infrastructure. Many rural areas and urban slums still lack proper toilets and sewage systems, making it difficult to achieve universal sanitation coverage. Water quality is also under threat due to pollution from industries, agriculture runoff, and poor waste disposal practices. In several regions, polluted water sources limited access to safe drinking water, posing serious health risks. Ending open defecation continues to be a challenge, especially in rural areas. Insufficient toilet facilities, social attitudes, and low awareness about sanitation and hygiene contribute to the persistence of this practice. Behavioral changes is equally important. Encouraging people to adopt water-saving habits, proper sanitation practices, and good hygiene requires continuous education and community engagement. Finally, the development and maintenance of water and sanitation infrastructure demands large financial investments. Securing adequate funding and ensuring efficient use of resources remain major hurdles in providing sustainable water and sanitation services across the country. This was all about today's lecture. Hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you for watching.